business here. He goes, but nobody knows it. He said they're sitting over there in the EU, and when Europeans think of the U.S., they think Boston, New York, Chicago, L.A. Sometimes they remember Texas, and they always remember Disney World. And he goes, so the problem is that they don't know you're here. And so he had an intern from Edinburgh sitting there, and I sat there with him, and I was talking to him. I said, so what's the most surprising thing to you about Atlanta? He goes, it's a city. He said, I was picturing guys sitting on their porches spitting tobacco, and this is a real city. You have restaurants. And I said, okay, that's a problem, right? So that's been sort of my challenge over the last 2 years as I've been working with the consulates. How do I help bridge that gap? One of the number one things that they asked for when I talked to them about how we start encouraging more business between Europe and Georgia specifically was I think you all probably have heard of the U.S.-EU trade agreement that's being worked on. That is what you're seeing before you today is TTIP. It's the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership. The idea is very simple. The EU and the U.S. together combine and make up what's known as the transatlantic trade. Transatlantic trade, until about 2 years ago, was over half of global trade. It's steadily declining. And the reason is because we have so many tariffs and regulatory bodies and issues when it comes to trade between the U.S. and Europe. It's much easier to just go trade with Asia or South America or Africa. And so we've stopped trading with our historical trade partners because governments made it so difficult. So both entities have come together recognizing that. They've said, look, between the U.S. and the EU, we comprise 60% of global GDP, 33% of trade and goods, 42% of trade and services, and that's less than 1/7 of the world's population. So if you want to get your biggest bang for your buck, you incentivize this trade. So how do we do that? Well, we need to get government out of the way. And that's the entire concept between TTIP, is number one, eliminate all tariffs and trade barriers between the U.S. and the EU. Number two, get the U.S. and the EU regulatory bodies communicating. Right now, if you want to introduce a new food or a drug and do business in both bodies, you need to go to the FDA here and the European equivalent of the FDA and do the exact same testing twice. Well, that's cost prohibitive for a lot of companies. So you'll find companies say, look, we'll go do it in the U.S. and we'll do it for years, and maybe eventually we'll take it over there, when in reality they've got a whole market just waiting for them. Same vice versa. And so we need to get those bodies communicating. If the standards are the same, then let's recognize them as similar. Number three is IP protection. Prior to my current job, I worked in software, and you recognize very quickly you get nervous about doing business overseas because they don't necessarily protect your intellectual property the same way. So that's going to be the third priority of TTIP, is protecting intellectual property. And number four is subsidy reductions, making sure that some country in Europe can't decide that they're going to fund their industry, give them a market advantage over American companies, and us have removed all our tariffs and run into an issue. So it'll cover that in the treaty as well. What you really care about is what it means for Georgia. The most recent estimates are that if we were to pass TTIP tomorrow, remove the regulations between the U.S. and the EU, we'd be looking at roughly 31.5% increase in exports out of Georgia into the European Union. Give you an idea of what that looks like right now. In 2012, we had $6.3 billion exported out of Georgia in goods alone into Europe, another $5.2 billion in services. You're talking about $11.5 billion impact. That's 18% of the total goods we ship out of Georgia go to the European Union. You increase that by another 31.5%. You're talking about overnight boosting about 24,000 jobs in Georgia. So it means really good things. So what am I asking you for? Obviously, I'm not asking you to pass a treaty. Texas and Tennessee have both passed urging resolutions or gone and petitioned their congressmen to continue negotiations here. All this does is it encourages the Congress of the United States and the executive branch to continue negotiation toward a mutually beneficial treaty. This is something that could benefit Georgia in huge ways, benefit the United States in a huge way, and plainly make for a freer market globally. So would appreciate your favorable consideration and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Representative Caldwell. Are you working with the Department of Economic Development?
So they're aware that I'm carrying the resolution. I have been working with the Metro Chamber and with the Georgia Association of Manufacturers, and both of them are supportive here as well. But I have made the Commissioner aware of the resolution. Good.
Are there any questions from the members of the committee? Chairman Pruitt.
Thank you. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. Just got a quick question. Is there anything particular particular that we really need to be concentrating on, or that as far as shipping out to them or them into us?
So
is there a particular product or?
It's a great question. So the beauty is there are 7 industries in Georgia that we really concentrate on in Europe, and I won't jump into all of them. The biggest industry this is going to impact for us is aerospace. Our aerospace industry has grown by something like 34% over the last 5 years here in Georgia, exports into Europe, and they're estimating it would grow by another 28% if we were to pull the tariffs off. So you're talking about almost doubling the growth that we've seen over the last 5 years in that industry alone over the next 10. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Representative Taylor.
The appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
Do we have, just before I recognize you for that motion, do we have anyone else that wants to speak to this resolution? All right. Then I recognize you for a motion.
Move do pass.
All right. We have a do pass and we have a second on that. Do we have any further discussion? Therefore, House Resolution 1280, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Your resolution is headed to roost.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Obviously, you did a lot of homework and a lot of work on this, and we appreciate that you brought it to us this morning. I guess that's it. No. House Bill 984 by illustrious leader and chairman. Chairman Stevens, House Bill 984. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. This is the second hearing on this bill, and very quickly, House Bill 984 is an attempt to create a sports marketing funding mechanism for all around the state to allow whenever you go out and you bid for these tournaments or anything that has to do with sports tourism in the state. This is a mechanism that will allow you to have essentially a revolving fund so that you can draw those funds down at the time that you need those so that you can get that event in the state. A good example might be Representative Dempsey. Their whole area in Rome is trying to become a hub for the country in tennis. That's something they want to do in a long-range plan. If they're out there trying to get to competitively bid to get a large destination there for a tennis event, this mechanism would allow them with their sports commission to go out and draw those funds down to close the deal, essentially. I had a lot of questions the last time, and I appreciate that's why we have 2 hearings before. And one of them, quite honestly, is where's the money come from? Well, the original dollars are going to have to come. This is only the shell from seed money, which would have to be appropriated by the General Assembly and or the governor. Of course, both of us would be involved in that. And how much can my sports commission apply for, and to whom do the local sports commissions apply for the funds? The Department of Economic Development will be the houser for this revolving fund, and they'll be the ones that the sports commissions will apply to as Department of Economic Development. When will the funds be available? 2015 session, the General Assembly will first consider the request, but again, it has to be after we put the initial seed money in there. How will the money be paid back? The West Georgia model essentially takes all the factors into consideration, which is the reason that it'll be a self-funding model. It says it takes into consideration sales tax, hotel motel tax, just from the proceeds from the enormous amount of people that are going to be there, and that replenishes the fund. And it goes back into the general fund, which is the next question: does it violate the gratuities clause? In the way that we've got it set up here, it does not. And is my local sports commission liable then for paying back these closing dollars to get these events there? And the answer to that is no. It's because of the way that we've got it drafted. The dollars themselves become self-supporting, and the funds go back into the general fund, which is a line item for the Department of Economic Development to replenish these funds. It's something that I believe that probably the city of Atlanta and the bigger sports commissions may never need, because they're big enough to do this on their own. But to give our smaller cities the opportunity to land some of these events and create something pretty special around the state is is a mechanism. This is probably going to be the only way they'll be able to do it. And I'll answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You do have some questions. Chairman Nix.
Yes, thank you. This is interesting. A couple of questions. If we're going to say that the hotel motel tax or something will be paying this back, will there have to be some type of local legislation to designate that specifically to pay this back, or how will that happen?
No, the West Georgia model just dictates through the proceeds how many people are going to be there, which is all of the funds that's generated there. You know, forget the local stuff. That's just gravy, so to speak. But there's always more money coming back in as a result of the sales tax and all the local funds that's generated by the event, which goes back into the general fund. Doesn't go right directly back into this particular fund.
Okay. Can I ask another one, please?
Sure.
In terms of the liability of the local sports authority, just say in LaGrange where they do some big softball tournaments, just say they've planned one, they've drawn some money down, and it happens to be one of those weekends where you have tremendous storms and just totally gets wiped out and they end up canceling them. What happens then?
It's a good point. You know what? If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, can I invite William Pate up to? This is not the first time out of the chute. This has been done in Texas and some other states. And the head of the Chick-fil-A Bowl is here, and some of the other sports events, which is where they've gotten this idea. If you won't mind, I'll
Can we do the Chick-fil-A Bowl at Callaway Stadium in LaGrange?
We'd be happy to negotiate that with you. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, so the way this would work, the funds in most cases will not be enough to cover the entire event. So you'll have to do partnership with your local CVB and in some cases with your chamber. And the way those typically work is that there's an agreement between the three institutions that if you have some sort of catastrophic event, as you just mentioned, one is you'd have liability insurance on the event, so you would be protected there. But in the case of something that was kind of unforeseen, there's usually an agreement between those three organizations that they would pick up the shortfall. So there is protection on the back end in case you, in addition to insurance and beyond insurance, there would be an agreement between those three entities to backfill any losses that you had.
And let me follow up just a little bit. This is only the money that it takes to guarantee the event. This is a bid process. So and you only spend the money once you win the bid. So this is not for the entire event. This is only the money that gets the event there.
Okay.
Sure. An example.
I think a great way to understand this would be for me to give you an example. So if Chatham County is, which they are interested in bringing a large cycling event to Chatham County, the West Georgia model computes hotel stays, not the hotel motel tax portion, but the state tax portion. Everything here is around the direct state tax because we wanted clear visibility to the real dollars. You know, I know sometimes y'all deal with multipliers and things, but we're dealing here with real dollars that everybody can see. And so in that instance, when we ran that through that model, there's $300,000 of direct state tax that would come from that event. 80% of that, $240,000, could be available to Chatham County to bid for that event. The bid and to run that event is only $175,000, so that's actually all they would ask for. The beauty of this is you only expend the money if you get the event, so it's 100% guaranteed success. When you go to expend the money, in most cases the expenditures are within 6 months of the event. So it's, even though sometimes these are bid out several years in advance, following the money, if you will, is a very short span. So again, there's a lot of visibility and oversight to how the money moves, so you know, nobody can misappropriate anything. And so when they get the event, they run the event, and then all the money that is generated, the state tax that is generated, then of course goes back to the general fund. And then the next year, at the end of the year, that $175,000 that was used to run the event would come back to the fund. So the fund is always leveled off so other people can access it. So it's really clear visibility, 100% guaranteed success, and it really helps the municipalities across the state to you know, be able, because that's a big event, but it could be you mentioned softball. It could be 100 softball teams is 1,000 people in and staying overnight. You get 1,000, 2,000 room nights. You can see how it starts to add up. So that's kind of in a nutshell how the process we would see would work.
Okay.
If I may ask one more question. You keep
Go ahead.
talking about this West Georgia model. I'm West Georgia, and I've never heard of it. What's the West Georgia model?
We contracted about a year ago, the Atlanta Sports Council, the Convention Visitors Bureau, and with assistance from Southern Company, to build a model at West Georgia to be able to articulate what we're trying to do. We wanted something that could withstand, small events as well as large events. So that's done through
University of West Georgia?
yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Braddock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So does this money have anything to do with the other bill that we passed last year that, created a fund with the ticket sales?
No, that was tourism destination.
Okay.
As you might remember, that one was one that took several years of work, and that one says that if you invest capital, for example, a Disney World or something that were to come to Georgia with a large capital, that you'd be able to recoup 25% of the sales tax proceeds over 10 years. And that one, this is different. This is geared strictly for sporting events on tourism destination. That is a mechanism only to allow you to bid and win the bid and have the money available for the bid as soon as you get the event.
And so the
guaranteed.
money, once they get the bid, the purpose of it is for marketing that event?
For marketing the event
Okay.
and closing the event.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Pruitt.
Chairman, that was a good question. I think the marketing is one thing. The other thing is sometimes you have to guarantee that you're going to do a certain amount of marketing in order to win the bid and things like that. So I think that's probably one way it could be used. But I got several questions. One, who's going? I know you said it was economic development, but there's not going to be a board or anything. The economic development of the state is going to actually do the analysis and help do the analysis as to whether these are good projects or bad projects. Or, we think about in Eastman having a world champion frog jumping or a peanut rolling contest or something. I don't know. But anyway, we have very few things that we can put on in Eastman, and we wouldn't require a lot. But this is not going to be a matching fund from the locals or anything like that. Therefore, somebody has got to do an analysis as to whether there's, if I said I was going to have the world tennis match in Eastman, we only have 2 courts. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So, who is going to help make those decisions?
You're going to have to get it approved first through the Sports Commission, which then goes through the Economic Development and Tourism Board, and every year you're going to get a report of what these dollars have done at the end of the year, and that's, of course, going to be on the department as well.
All right, very good. Thank you. I think this is a great bill, and I appreciate you guys bringing it, and I support it 100%. And I just get disappointed sometimes because we always seems the money goes to the metro, and I'm not complaining because it still supports Georgia. But just like, and this is a totally different subject, but just like we put money into the budget last year for all the libraries to do remodeling, roofing, and whatever they needed to do, and then we ended up, the policy was it was a 50% match. Well, in a county that we're in, the tier system we're in, we can't raise 50%. And when I called somebody to try to help us, they said, well, ask your foundations. We don't have any foundations. So I'm just asking you, as you go through this, have some consideration for the small, and you've mentioned it already, the small rural communities. It may be a small project, but it would be big to us.
Yeah, and you'd apply again back to the Sports Commission. They would approve it based on the number of people that would be there. But again, this money is for closing that bidding process. It is going to be huge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Dempsey.
I want to say thank you for bringing this forward. And I know it sounds a little confusing, but basically the way I understand it, it is for that beginning, that bid process, which often stops communities in their track. So that's the full and complete intent of it. And it is going to be so meaningful for Rome, which I don't think is considered one of the top tier cities. And this tennis project, Chairman Stevens has worked with me on that for so very long, but it took my community stepping up to the plate to find the dollars to build the tennis courts and to do the preparation for it. But there will be opportunities very soon when we are bidding on a very difficult tournament, and just to get that little boost will make a major difference. So I thank you for it.
It brings you to the table, and you can actually close it with this money.
Right.
Chairman, I've got one question. What if I'm in competition with Rome? And we're bidding out.
It's an equal opportunity, though. It is competitive in that sense, that your project is not in any way hindered because of what we are doing. But you're going to have to show up to the table with a great plan to win that opportunity to help your bid process.
And they're going to know how many people are going to show up at your event, which is what the model's all about.
We have time for one more question. Chairman Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Stevens, I guess now on this upfront money that is coming from the private sector, and I assume there's a difficulty in getting the private sector to, after they've done their due diligence, like we're going to do in economic development, to come up to allow us to access this upfront money. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's the after you make the bid, and it's a large bid, as you might imagine, to get some of these events there. It's the money that's required to pay at the time of the bid, at the time of the acceptance of the bid, so that you're guaranteed those that event.
So there's some reluctance, I guess is my question, from the private sector to provide that upfront money at that timing in the whole transaction and the plan.
And sometimes the CVB just doesn't have the money to cut a check for that amount.
Okay.
That's the main reason. Essentially, like I say, the best way that I can explain this is a revolving fund that will always be replenished and always be there for closing dollars for you to get these events to your community.
Thank you for bringing this bill to the committee. It's thinking outside of the box, and it's another way Georgia can prosper and bring in the type of events that we would love to have in it. Do we have any other questions or anyone that wants to speak to this bill? Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, y'all have before you House Bill 984, which is LC 344103 ERT. ERT. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to make a motion to pass.
All right. And we have a motion and a second for House Bill 984. Do we have any other discussion? All right. All those in favor of House Bill 984 as presented by Chairman Stevens signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming this morning.